Tracy Harwood. So I've done a little bit of digging around and I've discovered.
Ricky Grove. Fog comes in on little cat feet.
Phil Rice. This is the best film that I've seen all year and maybe ever.
Damien Valentine. Use the machinima, Luke.
Hey everyone, my name is Ricky Grove and I am leading the And Now for Something Completely Machinima podcast for this week. I'm here with my pals Phil Rice, Damien Valentine, and Tracy Harwood. Hey!
Hello.
Yo, yo, yo.
We're going to be looking at Damien's pick, which is pretty interesting. It's a space theme for this week. Now, Damien, you said you had a little news before we start talking about your film?
Yeah, one of the games that we've been following since we started this show is Star Citizen, because we've been watching some of the videos made with that game. But Star Citizen has a second component to it called Squadron 42, which is a single player game with a whole story and cinematic element to it. And they've been very quiet about it for quite some time. Obviously, they don't want to show off too much because they don't want to give away the story and all of that. But at the recent Citizen Con, which is their anniversary for reaching the crowdfunding goals, they do a big convention and they show off all the latest developments. They decided to show off what they've done with Squadron 42 because they reached a big milestone, which is it's feature complete. Now all they have to do is the polishing. Now I'm going to say that they don't give a date on when it's finished, so they anticipate doing a lot of polishing on this to get it right. So don't get too excited. But they released this video which shows off the game, some of the cinematics, and they're talking about how the characters are animated, and you get to see it from the game perspective. So you get to see the cutscenes, and you're walking through, and they show off the customizable characters because you do this cutscene, and it kind of cuts between different ways that you can customize your character. So you have a black man, a white woman, and all kinds of different combinations. They show up in this one sequence, and then they're showing off some of the big Hollywood names that are doing performances in this and how they've captured their likenesses and how you can interact with them in the game. And it's quite a lengthy video showing it off, but they talk about how they did it. So it's not just showing the game, but you get to see some of the motion capture with the actors in their motion capture gear with the cameras on their face to capture all of their expressions and the microphone there in front of them as well, which looks really heavy. And you got the designers of the game talking about how they've improved the rendering capabilities of the game since they last showed off something, and they do like, this is what it used to look like compared to what it looks like now, and it's really interesting. And of course, this is a very cinematic game, and we've seen people use Star Citizen in a very cinematic way, so it's interesting to see what the developers are doing it themselves. And
yeah,
maybe that will go, elements of this will go back to the community, so people making machinima with the game can use some of these tools themselves. So I just thought it's really interesting to see this video, and I wanted to mention it because it's inspiring, it's interesting. So there we go. Squadron 42 has this update, and there'll be a link in the below for
terrific.
Yeah, well,
You had some news for us, Tracy?
Well, just sort of following on from that a little bit, actually, what I picked up is the Day of the Vara 2953, 60 Seconds of Horror Machinima contest for Star Citizen, ironically. And what I saw was that people could upload content to TikTok or use TikTok as the entry process for it. And it kind of got me thinking about what's going on with Robert Space Industries, that they're kind of being, pushing out, promoting the fact that people can kind of create contests, machinima, and enter contests and all the rest of it. And it's something that we'll pick up from my point of view when we talk about your picks this week, Damien, because I think there's a little bit more to this. The fact that they're getting a bit keen to promote what they're up to in the light of the release of Starfield. I think that's what we're really seeing. So I'm quite intrigued to see the way in which they're tackling the launch of Starfield and how they're going about putting all these little bits and pieces out that might tease people to stay with them. So I'll just throw that out. I'll put a link to it. I'm just trying to see when the deadline for it is. I think it runs out quite quickly. Although I think it's open until the end of November. So I think you've got time to enter it if you're interested. So that's it. That's all my comments on that one.
I've got a quick bit of news about Second Life. Second Life has added PBR rendering, physically based rendering, to their system, which is a little kind of odd, because I would have thought what they would have really worked on is the ability to stream, improving their streaming services. But it physically based rendering does make things look a lot better. Textures take on a realistic quality to it. It's all based on real life ways that the rays of light hit certain objects and reflect in different ways. So it's fascinating to see that. I haven't seen examples of it, but there are a couple interesting videos on that show the difference between before and after using Second Life and physically based rendering. That's good news for machinima filmmakers, because it gives it a more compelling look. Second Life has always had a kind of, I don't know, specific visual style that looks kind of cartoony, I guess is what you would say. I remember talking to Hugh Hancock once and asking him why he didn't. It's when Second Life was in its prime, about 10 years ago. And I asked Hugh why he never wanted to work in why he didn't work in Second Life. And he says, because I don't like it the way it looks. It just doesn't, it's not appealing to me. And I think maybe this switch to PBR might change that.
Yeah, PBR textures, probably most of the people that listen to our show know, but PBR textures is traditional textures and shading there's a diffuse texture, which is basically the main color of the item, and then you have a normal map to give it some kind of textured look. There's a specular map, which is another image that determines how light generally bounces off of it. A couple other optional maps that you could add. And PBR rendering is just a more advanced version of that. You still have the diffuse, which is the traditional texture that's on something, the color, and you still have normal or bump maps, but then you also have ambient occlusion maps, which is a particular way, like Ricky said, related to the way that light interacts with the surface. There's a metallic shader, and there's also a roughness shader, and then there's other optional advanced ones and stuff. And the result is pretty stunning. Like if you've worked at all with iClone as an example, if you download an older generation model and bring it in, and it has traditional textures and shaders, and you bring in a PBR model and apply the textures there, yeah, it's quite different.
Dramatically different.
One of the things that I actually enjoy quite a bit is I'm sourcing out a prop or something like that for iClone, and when you first bring in an FBX prop into iClone, the textures don't always apply automatically. So you have to drag them over into the little grid on iClone. And as you add each texture, each shader, you can see the difference in real time it's pretty neat, because when you first drag in the diffuse texture of Darth Vader or something, it's pretty plain looking. It's pretty and then you bring in the normal map, and then you bring in the ambient occlusion and and as each one goes, it's like, oh, okay, now we're talking.
I enjoy doing that too.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting it's going to be interesting to see, because I assume there's still a very active content creator community on Second Life.
Oh, yes, there is. Yeah,
creating avatars and clothing and accessories and all of that stuff. Well, that changes their process in a pretty significant way. There's no straight conversion process from traditional shaders to PBR. It's a different process to generate those images. but it's also a well-documented process.
That's right.
Like
You
there
can learn
are
it pretty
plenty of
easily.
tutorials and guides on how to do those in Blender or whatever tool that they're using to make their content. So I don't see it as being any kind of setback. Frankly, most of the people that are creating, apparel and accessories in Second Life, they're pretty experienced modelers anyway. They have to be. So
Yeah.
they probably already know how to do that. And the smart ones will jump on that very fast because
Sure.
the difference is it's quite noticeable.
And once you get a lot of PBR content in, the non-PBR content is going to really stand out. So it'll encourage
Oh,
those
yeah.
creators to get in and update their creations.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see.
Warning in the Reallusion store: if you see something that says it was made for iClone 5, buyer beware. You're going to have a little texturing work to do.
Yeah.
It's not that hard to do once you do have it. No.
It's not.
All right. Let's go on to your pick, Damien. You picked something from Starfield. What is that? And why did you choose it?
Oh, it's actually not long after we recorded last month, because we were talking a lot about Starfield last month and the potential it had for Machinima. So I think it's the next day afterwards I started thinking, I wonder if anyone's made anything with Machinima with Starfield yet. And I came across these two videos. And I'm going to talk about them together because they're both kind of related. So the first one is called Starfield, the feature no one talks about. And it's not really a Machinima film. It's more of it's a guy who's familiar with the game talking about the potential for Starfield as a Machinima tool. He starts off by explaining what Machinima is, and he shows some clips from some other films, which some I recognize and some I'm not familiar with. And then he talks about, he's on to talking about the game, and he's talking about how the game is moddable and all the different kind of customization and the content in it, and the vast array of locations and stuff like that. And then he concludes with a demo battle video that he made himself. Now, it's not a cinematic masterpiece, but it's not meant to be. He just wants to show off that you can do a scene in the game. And so it's a battle between some soldiers and some alien bug things in the desert. And he's used console commands in the game. So as we record this, there are still no mod tools for the game. So he did this without any of that. He just used the console commands in the game. And the way I understand it is he found a location on a desert planet, and he spawned a lot of Marines on one side, and then he spawned some of these bug things nearby, and then he basically let them fight. And he got in with the camera, which I'm not quite sure how he did that. There must be a mod somewhere to let him do that. And he basically filmed it. And he did get some really good shots to show off its potential. I mean, it's just a battle between soldiers and bugs. You've seen it in Starship Troopers or Aliens or anything like that. So it's nothing special in that regard, but it's not meant to be, like I said. But it kind of shows off the potential of what Starfield can do now without the mod tools available. And I think he made this video to encourage people to go out there and do something. And I'm quite intrigued by this camera tool that he used, and it might be fun to document some of my own experiences in the game in like this.
Yeah, I hope you do that.
Yeah. And then I'm going to go on to the second video, which it's called The Mantis. Now in the game, the Mantis is kind of a Batman-like vigilante, and as the player, you have the option to become the Mantis if you take the right side quests. You can get the ship and the gear, and you can go out and doing that. And there's this whole element of, and if you get attacked by pirates and you're flying the Mantis ship, they're terrified of you and they'll flee. And there's different ways they can interact. Some they'll just escape. Sometimes they'll just say, I'm going to give you all my money, don't kill me. Things like that, which is really hilarious. But I don't want to talk too much about the Mantis lore because, if you play the game, you don't want that spoiled for you. But what someone's done is they've obviously been inspired by that lore, and they're making a Machinima series about the Mantis in the game world. And so what we've got here is just a trailer for it because they haven't finished it yet. And it kind of shows off the Mantis character, talking about how he he's going out looking for justice, and very Batman-like as a and it's only about a minute or two long, so it's not very long, but it shows off all different kinds of shots of the game and how the story he's developing. And so I thought these are the two good examples of, well, you got one encouraging people to make machinima with it, and here's one someone's already working on something. And obviously we haven't got the end result for that, but I thought these are going to be my two picks, since we were talking so much about Starfield last month. So yeah, people are already working on it. So what do you guys think?
I go next.
Yeah.
So for me, yeah, I with the first one, I thought it was a really interesting kind of creator's eye view of the potential of Starfield. And you're right, we talked about this quite extensively last month. But this guy takes it a little bit further than just that kind of, oh yeah, it's got great potential. He provides this really interesting demo, I think. And yeah, the demo is not massively, there's no great story or anything with it, but what is quite astonishing with it is the animation quality, and the way that kind of unfolds, considering all they are is NPCs. I mean, that was quite interesting, I thought. And so it's the level of the detail through it, and the way the soundscape is presented. I thought that was, I mean, I really thought that was a very interesting example of just how high quality this game is going to be. And I think it's got masses of potential, which clearly, this guy does too. The bit that I liked less about this was this kind of conflation of the story that he wanted to tell with the sales pitch around it. And I understand why he's done that. Of course I do. And he, he does have an interesting point to make. I mean, they're kind of fair enough, I suppose. But the way that he presents it is both a conversation about its potential, and he does that with the audience. But this sort of sales pitch, I find that just a little bit annoying as well. So that was kind of my take on the first one. The Mantis, I thought as a teaser, I thought that was a really interesting, another example of just what quality the animation is in this game. I thought he set the scene really, really well. He's got this kind of hero, this vigilante type, and this kind of intriguing, invisible entity that I thought that was really well animated, actually. So again, it was another piece that demonstrated the story potential. Sound design I thought was really interesting. Animation was beautiful. And actually with that one, I thought the Mantis one, I thought I can't wait to see this, actually. I can't wait to see what he does with it. But the bit that intrigues me beyond that is when I was looking at what these guys were doing, quite clearly the people that this is pulling in across all the machinima community or communities is the Star Citizen machinima making community. And really, I suppose beyond the obvious appearance of the environment and the different things you can kind of do with the stories you might want to tell, it has to be because of the problems and confusion that Roberts Space Industries created when it teased Squadron 42 last year. And if you remember, what it did at that time was it updated the rules on the premise of protecting the use of the game, by basically highlighting what folks could and couldn't do. And ultimately, what that did was created this environment of confusion and uncertainty about just what you can do with machinima using Star Citizen. And I remember the consequence of that. I don't know if you remember. Do you remember the Barely Not Monkeys space opera Adrift? Do you remember that?
Yes, absolutely.
Which was absolutely gorgeous. Well, in December last year, after they'd released these updated rules, they then released a statement which basically said that the game had prevented them from finishing Adrift Part 2. And they basically said that at that point, their set had been removed from the game for some time. But I hope what this particular engine does, the what's it called?
Starfield.
Yeah,
Starfield.
Starfield. What I hope this does is actually enables creators like those guys to actually work and finish the films that they've been putting together. And I think that transition is exactly why we're seeing Robert Space Industries now put out some of these kind of like, you know, little teasers, little contests, and so on and so forth, because I bet they're running very nervous about what the impact of this game and its potential will actually have on what they do. So I think, you know, for that reason alone, these two picks, Damien, were really interesting ones to discuss and reflect on for me.
Good.
So thank you.
Wow, those are great points, Tracy.
I'll go next. So yeah, with the first one, the Starfield Machinima, yeah, it is interesting that we were just talking about it in those very terms about what potential there is, and it seems like the person who made this video is excited by those same things and wants to excite others as well. You're right, the demo that he did isn't as like some kind of standalone work or something. It doesn't make much sense. But if you think about it, a lot of the Star Citizen stuff that we've seen is not like Adrift.
Yeah,
it is
absolutely.
space battles and gun battles, and you know, it's a younger audience. That's what they're interested in. So it may have been a pretty savvy idea for Allure on his part, because, you know, I'm looking at it for the potential of character-driven drama, you know,
Of course, of course.
close-ups and but you know, that's not maybe got the mass appeal that, let's say, a Starship Troopers does, which I'm not putting Starship Troopers itself, by the way, in that category, because the reason Starship Troopers is a work of genius is because of the writing.
Absolutely.
It is one of the most masterful pieces of satire ever put on film. But a lot of people who enjoy Starship Troopers, they don't get that from it.
Goes right over their head.
They
Yeah.
think it's literal, you know. So that's just, there's just different people looking for different things. So the conflation, when you said the word conflation, Tracy, I thought sure you were going to talk about his summary of the rise and fall of Machinima.
No.
Because in kind of one paragraph, he says, you know, Machinima was a big thing. And even though the Machinima YouTube channel isn't around anymore, people are saying, and I just thought, oh,
Yeah.
no. But
he lost me at
I
that
also,
point.
I need to recognize that, you know, like them or not, capital M machinima.com was very successful in hijacking that term and redefining it as what they did. We're, of course, as we've declared, I think, on our anniversary episode, we're in the process of taking that name back, and your help as an audience is much appreciated. So
Yep.
I didn't really dwell on that. Anyway, yeah, I think there's definite potential for Starfield Machinima, but the stuff that I want to see that would get me excited enough to buy the game specifically for that is more, can it pull off character-driven drama like we saw in Adrift, which is just incredible. I want to comment also on the game is keeping us from making this. I'd be interested to know what they meant by that. If they mean the game, like, I guess you said their set got deleted, but
well, I would guess it has to do with the representation of the character. Do you remember we had this discussion about what it was that they were actually stopping people doing? And one of the things that came up was the representation of characters in Machinima. Well, the problem that they had was that the way the characters will look in what's it called, Squadron 42, is exactly the same as in the Star Citizen general version. And therefore you can't not have them look the same. And I would guess that would be one of the main things.
okay.
But the other thing would have to be to do with the way that they funded that, I would suggest, because they weren't necessarily you know, they were, you know, they're professional actors in there as well. And I would say that there'd probably be something in the way that had been developed as a project, and the way that they were thinking about how they might develop it into something more substantial. It's
Gotcha.
probably also that, you know, it's to do with the trajectory or the pathway that they were on with that.
So
But
really,
nonetheless,
it's
I was hugely disappointed when you know, when they said, oh, we can't continue with it, because I was so looking forward to seeing what the next episode was going to reveal to us.
They could
Brilliant.
I
probably
was
do
too.
once they got the mod tools. I imagine they could do Adrift with this.
Yeah, I think
Starfield.
so.
And as for the set being removed, I guess as the game gets developed, old content is being removed from it because it doesn't match up with the newer stuff. With Starfield, you can build your own ship. You have all these different components. You just slot them together. So the ship, my background here is Starfield. That's my ship, and I've slotted it together all these different components, and they're just kind of like you get
Almost
a
like
cockpit.
a kit bash, huh?
Yeah, you get different type of cockpits, and you just put it there, and then you get different rooms. You just connect them together, and you know there are limits on what you can do because each piece has different connection points, so you can't just make absolutely anything into a big jumble. It has to make sense to the game, but you get a lot of freedom for it, and you can choose different interiors and so on. So they could build a ship that looks the way they want,
Or get crazy and take it all over to iClone/Unreal, you know?
Yeah, that would be
Yeah,
good too.
absolutely.
You figure there are some assets from that original production that are salvageable, which is the voice performances, the sound effects and stuff like that. So it would be an endeavor for sure. It would be quite an ordeal to do, but if they really wanted to, they could pursue it. But it sounds like it's just another manifestation of what is always and has always been the risk of building something on a foundation of someone else's property, a game, if you have commercial aspirations for it. If you're just having fun, those risks are not really as big a deal. Okay, so the Mantis, I did not know anything about the lore, so I think when I watched this, I was kind of assuming that this was you know, that it was an original story. Now clearly the Batmanish elements were clear, but I didn't realize it was built on lore. It
is their own story. They've just taken an element of lore out of the game to do their own thing.
to build their own thing. Yeah. This one we covered a film in a prior week where it was the iClone film of the big creature, and we kind of savaged it for some issues that we saw with the writing. And I think to a lesser degree, the same critique could be applied here in terms of maybe being a little bit too direct. And a teaser, it's a little bit different rules because you've got a different objective altogether than a standalone short. But it reminded me watching this, and I watched it a few times, the challenge of conveying a serious tone. Like in Machinima, maybe in particular, it's challenging because Machinima tends to be a little bit lighter, I guess. Not always, but you know, it's hard to convey a serious tone that doesn't go across that line where you're taking yourself too seriously.
Right.
That's a tough balance. So I respect the endeavor, and they did a fairly decent job with it. Now naturally I couldn't help but, because I was a little bit critical of the writing, I couldn't help but come up with a list of suggestions where they could avoid
brother.
the serious tone problem. So as a free service of this show, I'm going to go ahead and present those, and I release all copyright to these ideas. One would be, you know, the main line of the kind of apex of the teaser is, "I am the hunter, the executioner, and the only bulwark against all evil in this filthy universe." An ideal one would be kind of a parody of The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, where as soon as he said that, then it cuts to his employer, hey, bulwark against evil, get back to work. And that's the premise of the story, right? Is this guy
Right,
who's
right.
in his mind, he's the Mantis, but really he's just the, a janitor or the cafeteria worker or something. That's idea number one. Take it if you'd like it. Idea number two would be romantic comedy. I am the hunter, the executioner, and the only bulwark against all evil in this filthy. Who is that? And the scope zooms on this very shapely alien woman. And basically, he would be the Mantis, but for his uncontrollable womanizing and constant distraction, almost a Guardians of the Galaxy feel, where he's just he wants the girl. So that's idea number two. And idea number three would of course, I can't pass this up without going the lowball route, which would be I am the hunter, the executioner, and the only bulwark against all evil in this filthy universe. But first, I must face my nemesis, psoriasis. Or lactose intolerance. Insert sound effect here. So yeah, anyway, those are some ideas. If they had a change of heart and wanted to turn it into a Batman-esque comedy, those are some possible ideas that they could do.
Wow, Phil.
And then you don't have to worry about conveying the serious tone. It's a satirical tone. So
Yep.
yeah.
Wow. And that's copyright free, ladies and gentlemen.
Copyright free.
Ideas.
That's right. I'll be uploading those to the Internet Archive after the show.
Well, I enjoyed Mantis teaser a lot. I saw what you were talking about, Phil. It didn't bother me quite as much as it did you, because I love the visual style of it. And I also thought the voice over was outstandingly acted.
Yes.
And it looks really great. But I see your point. I think you're absolutely right. And that idea of conveying seriousness in machinima is so true. And it's been a problem since the very beginning. And I think it's because there are two reasons I think that is the case. One is the Disney factor in the United States. Cartoons are always going to be associated with Walt Disney. And the fact that machinima is essentially a kind of fancy cartoon in a way. And those two things cause people to just not take it seriously. Now, we have seen, we're at this point, we've become machinima experts. I'll fucking go ahead and say it. We are machinima experts. Not too many people have seen as many or worked as hard as we have on machinima and understanding its history and its production. So we have seen many, many examples of machinima being taken seriously, and it can be done. But it is a problem, especially for new creators and the general audience, audience wide. I remember not so long ago, I was at a social gathering and somebody asked me what I did. And I said, well, I'm retired, but one of the things I do is a podcast. And so what's a podcast about? And I said, machinima. She says, oh, what's that? So you have the archetypal situation of trying to explain what machinima is to someone. And one of the things they said, oh, like cartoons. Yeah, it's like cartoons, the Roadrunner and Daffy Duck and all of that. So you're sort of fighting against the current and trying to share the idea that you can make serious drama out of it. And I think you're absolutely right, Phil. Most users for the Starfield are going to be creating shoot 'em ups and fun things that they can share with their friends or do with their friends. And that's the spirit of machinima. It's about community. So that's cool. I like that. It's just that we tend to look at machinima a little more carefully and tend to respect filmmakers and films that have a little more depth to them. And speaking of depth, the Starfield feature nobody talks about, I liked, but I was also bothered by the sales pitchy quality like you were, Tracy. It sort of niggled at me a little bit. It's sort of was trying to sell machinima as being a kind of cheap throwaway kind of thing, I wish he would have been a little more serious about it. But then again, when he actually showed the machinima that he made, that's the kind of machinima he wants to make. So that's fine. Hey, I got no problem with that. If making fun machinima is as cool as anything. But I wish he would have spent a little more time on the actual machinima he created, because if he's going to try to sell it, don't you want to make what it is you're selling look as good as you can? Because then more people will be convinced of what you're saying. But I understand, and I see his point. I was appreciative that Bethesda games included machinima tools in their kit bag. You don't see a lot of game makers doing that. You see game makers doing photo stuff, so you can do virtual street photography inside of it, but you don't see a lot of machinima tools coming out. So I was glad to see that, and I hope it's successful so that other companies can copy the idea of giving people the tools to create things in it. It is problematic with the issue of content, but it has always been problematic from day one. And we're gonna you're gonna have to cope with that. That's just the way it is. My feeling is that if you start out and you say, I want to make a machinima that makes money, you better choose the vehicle that you're going to use by reading their EULA very carefully and their terms of how to use their content very carefully, because otherwise you're going to get hurt.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful. I think the great majority of people are not going to do that, but if you do that, make sure you read the EULA, and also there's a possible chance of your work going viral, and it becomes a very much a commercial commodity. You might want to, before you start on a lengthy project in Machinima, look through the terms that they have, just in case something happens. It's always a good idea to do that anyway. I think if you're making something that you think is going to have your name on it and is going to be a good quality work, you have to consider that. But well, I like them. Go ahead.
Even just with regard to YouTube, if you're putting a video up and if you're a YouTube partner, for example, and you put a video up and it's going to tell you if it detects copyrighted content in there. It's not so good at detecting the visual content, but audio it can detect, and it'll just tell you, well, you can't monetize this video. That's a throwaway, who cares decision if you expect you're going to get 2,500 or 5,000 views. But if you get 5 million views, like you said, if it goes viral, that's a
significant chunk of
potential income, right? So if you care about that at all, then that's worth thinking about. If you don't, then honestly, part of me envies you. Have a great time with it. Then that's what it should be. I want to say one more thing, Ricky. If I don't know if you were
no, go ahead.
Yet,
I'm done. I'm pretty much done.
About that first Machinima video, there was a point that I've neglected to mention. You just reminded me of it. That he mentioned in the video that a lot of the manipulation he was able to do was with console commands, and I just wanted to point out that's a very, very encouraging thing in terms of future potential for modding. If those types of manipulating and spawning NPCs and all that are readily available at the command line, then modders are going to have no trouble accessing those commands through their mods. Games that don't have that exposed, it's much hard. I mean, Red Dead Redemption, great example. None of that's exposed. So what little can be done in that game with modding that benefits Machinima is a hard slog, and the mod often gets broken every time the game updates and has to be reprogrammed. And a lot of developers just say, after a few times of that, they just go, forget it.
What the hell?
This is not worth the trouble, because they can't monetize what they're doing either. So the fact that Starfield, they can say that they support that content all they want, but they actually built it into the game, the groundwork that's going to enable some really amazing things. And I think free camera is the least complicated of those. I think that absolutely will exist.
Yeah.
Whether it's a programmable camera where you can actually, program certain moves into it and stuff, well, that's for the modders to work out. But if they can get access to those camera coordinates and access, anything's possible there.
Yep.
To program spline moves and all kinds of neat stuff.
Yeah.
But in terms of manipulating what's happening with the actual objects and characters on the screen. If you want an example of what a supportive game can lead to with that, look at Grand Theft Auto 5. My goodness, the mods, the things that people can do in that, they can actually. So if you haven't played Grand Theft Auto 5, you don't know this, but a lot of the buildings, these beautiful buildings in the city, are just empty shells inside. And actually, there's not a whole lot of missions in the game that take you inside buildings. And if they do, it's actually somewhere else, and it's locked out during general play of the game and stuff like that. But because the good modding structure was there, there's actually a way, and it's a thriving enterprise right now, where people are. Okay, the only thing I know to compare it to is the way Google approached Google Maps. If you remember, when they first decided to add the 3D layer to Google Maps, they outsourced or made it able to be outsourced for people to submit 3D models of, let's say, a neighborhood or a building. And you should see Google Maps now. My goodness, that has been populated out, and it's pretty amazing. Grand Theft Auto, Rockstar Games basically did the same thing, or at least gave the ability for that through a mod. And there are people now who are building out fully decorated interiors to the major buildings in Grand Theft Auto, just for gameplay purposes. But what a machinima potential that would be.
For sure.
And then of course, that game already has some very nice filmmaking tools in it. They're limited, and the limitations can get a little frustrating. You can't be, very far away with the camera from whoever your main character is, so you have to really strategize with that. But anyway, it looks like Starfield is headed down a similar path, where just right out of the gate, they're welcoming modders and giving them, they're just commands in the command line right now, but those are tools. It's access to interfering with how the game works, and that's what machinima is.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what good machinima. That's where that can really flower, is when you can actually, make the game do something different than it normally does. Then it's elevated above just the level of let's play, and now it's wow, how did you do that? That's my favorite comment on an interesting machinima film, is when someone goes, "How in the world did you do that?" Someone who knows the game, and they're going, "How did they do?"
So true.
I love when we get one of those films across our desk at this show, is where we all puzzle over.
How did they do that?
Yeah, Damien and we've been doing this a long time, and when you stump us, it's like, that's cool, man. I love it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Anyway, I'm very excited about Starfield to see what happens.
And listeners, if you're interested in finding out where these mods are, the Starfield community is the place to go, but also Nexus mods online is a good place. They're probably the biggest and safest place to download mods, so that you don't download a mod that has, a worm or something in it. That's a great place to check. I'm sure they'll have a Starfield section if they don't already have it. Well, that's our pick this week. Thank you, Damien. Boy, those are lots of interesting and fun picks. The Starfield we'll keep an eye on Starfield. Maybe one of us will jump in and make something out of it. I plan on making a big battle scene, but we'll see how that we'll see how that turns out. Thank you, everyone. Send us your thoughts about what's going on, or what our content is this week, or the movies, whether we missed something, or you have an idea of your own. Send it to talk@completelymachinima.com. And as always, the show notes are at completelymachinima.com. Thank you, Tracy, Damien, and Phil. Enjoyed this conversation, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.